Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 marked the overthrow of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's pro-Western monarchy and the rise of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini's Islamic Republic. Widespread unrest had built through the 1970s, fueled by economic inequality, political repression, and resentment of the Shah's close ties to the United States. Millions of Iranians from diverse backgrounds, students, clerics, leftists, and nationalists, joined mass demonstrations demanding change. In February 1979, the Shah fled and revolutionary forces seized Tehran. The monarchy was abolished, a theocracy established, and Iran's foreign policy turned sharply anti-Western. The revolution reshaped Middle Eastern politics, inspiring Islamist movements across the region and permanently altering U.S.-Iran relations through the 1979 hostage crisis and decades of mutual hostility. Fall of USSR. The collapse of the Soviet Union in December 1991 marked the end of the Cold War and the dissolution of a superpower that had dominated global politics for nearly 70 years. Triggered by deep economic decline, nationalist uprisings, and the symbolic fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the Soviet collapse released 15 new independent states, including Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic nations, and Central Asian republics. Each faced the daunting task of building new governments, economies, and identities amid chaos. Globally, the USSR's fall ended the bipolar world order, leaving the United States as the sole superpower. It redefined global alliances, accelerated NATO expansion, and reshaped international relations for decades to come. Gulf War. The Gulf War erupted in August 1990 when Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, claiming it as Iraq's 19th province. The move threatened global oil supplies and regional stability, prompting swift international condemnation. A U.S.-led coalition of 35 nations, backed by the United Nations, launched Operation Desert Storm in January 1991 to expel Iraqi forces. Within 6 weeks, coalition air and ground assaults liberated Kuwait and decimated Iraq's military. The war showcased the dominance of U.S. military technology and marked America's emergence as the unchallenged post-Cold War superpower. However, sanctions and military containment left Iraq crippled, sowing resentment that would later contribute to regional instability in the 2003 Iraq War. Yugoslav Wars. The Yugoslav Wars were a series of brutal ethnic and territorial conflicts that accompanied the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. After the fall of communism and rising nationalism among Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, and others, Yugoslavia's 6 republics began seeking independence. Slovenia and Croatia declared separation in 1991, followed by Bosnia and Herzegovina, triggering violent wars marked by ethnic cleansing, sieges, and mass atrocities, most infamously the Srebrenica massacre. The conflicts drew NATO and the United Nations into humanitarian and military interventions, culminating in the 1999 Kosovo War. By decade's end, Yugoslavia had fragmented into several independent states, and the wars left deep ethnic scars, reshaping European security and international peacekeeping norms. 9/11. On September 11, 2001, the United States suffered the deadliest terrorist attacks in modern history when al-Qaeda operatives hijacked 4 commercial airplanes. 2 were flown into the World Trade Center towers in New York City, 1 struck the Pentagon, and another crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers intervened. Nearly 3,000 people were killed. The attacks shattered America's sense of security and triggered the War on Terror, beginning with the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan to topple the Taliban regime that sheltered al-Qaeda. Globally, September 11th transformed international security policy, expanding surveillance, counterterrorism cooperation, and military interventions, and deeply influenced U.S. foreign and domestic politics for decades, culminating in wars that reshaped the Middle East. Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was a wave of pro-democracy uprisings that swept across the Arab world beginning in late 2010. Sparked by the self-immolation of Tunisian street vendor Mohamed Bouazizi, protests rapidly spread to Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and beyond. Citizens rose against decades of corruption, repression, and economic stagnation, demanding freedom and dignity. Some movements achieved rapid change. Tunisia's dictator Ben Ali fled, and Egypt's Hosni Mubarak was overthrown. But others, like Gaddafi and Assad, turned into chaos and war. Libya and Syria collapsed into prolonged conflicts, while many surviving regimes doubled down on authoritarianism. Though it briefly raised hopes of democratic transformation, the Arab Spring ultimately exposed deep structural instability and reshaped Middle Eastern politics for a generation. Russia-Ukraine War. The Russia-Ukraine conflict began in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea after Ukraine's pro-Western revolution ousted President Viktor Yanukovych. Russia then backed separatist movements in eastern Ukraine, sparking a war that smoldered for years. In February 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion aiming to seize Kyiv and topple Ukraine's government. Ukrainian resistance, bolstered by Western military aid and international sanctions against Russia, halted the offensive, but turned the conflict into a prolonged attritional war. The invasion reshaped global geopolitics, reviving NATO unity, isolating Russia economically, and driving an energy crisis in Europe. With hundreds of thousands dead, the war has become the largest and most consequential conflict in Europe since World War II. Brexit. Brexit refers to the United Kingdom's decision to leave the European Union, a political and constitutional crisis that reshaped British and European politics. The 2016 referendum resulted in a narrow 52% vote to leave, exposing deep divisions across the UK by age, class, and region. Negotiations over the withdrawal dominated British politics for years, toppling two prime ministers, David Cameron and Theresa May, and paralyzing Parliament. The UK formally exited the EU on January 31, 2020, under Boris Johnson's government. Brexit disrupted trade, prompted renewed debate over Scottish independence and Northern Ireland's status, and weakened Britain's influence in Europe, marking the country's most significant political realignment since World War II. American polarization. Since 2016, the United States has been gripped by deep political polarization intensified by Donald Trump's presidency, which sharpened the divide between liberal and conservative ideologies. Trump's populist nationalist agenda energized his base, but alienated many moderates and progressives, fueling fierce clashes over immigration, race, climate change, and the role of government. The hashtag #MeToo movement, 2017, exposed systemic sexual abuse and reshaped gender politics, while the Black Lives Matter movement, resurgent in 2020, mobilized millions against racial injustice and police violence. Social media amplified both activism and division, spreading misinformation and outrage. Together, these forces fractured national unity, eroded institutional trust, and defined one of the most turbulent eras in modern American democracy. Catalonia Referendum. In October 2017, Catalonia, a wealthy and semi-autonomous region of Spain, held an independence referendum that Spain declared illegal under the Spanish Constitution. Catalan leaders, led by President Carles Puigdemont, argued for self-determination after years of tension over taxation, language rights, and political autonomy. Despite police crackdowns that injured hundreds, over 2 million Catalans voted, with 90% favoring independence amid low turnout. Spain's central government dissolved Catalonia's parliament, charged separatist leaders with sedition, and imposed direct rule. The confrontation triggered mass protests, long prison sentences for Catalan officials, and a lasting political deadlock that continues to divide Spanish politics and hinder constitutional reform efforts. Disputed 2020 election. The 2020 U.S. presidential election became one of the most divisive moments in modern American history. After Joe Biden defeated incumbent Donald Trump, Trump and his allies falsely claimed widespread voter fraud, refusing to concede. These allegations fueled months of political tension, lawsuits, and misinformation that eroded public trust in the electoral process. On January 6, 2021, a pro-Trump mob stormed the U.S. Capitol during the certification of electoral votes, leading to deaths, injuries, and the temporary suspension of Congress. The attack shocked the world and underscored the fragility of American democracy, prompting a historic second impeachment of Trump and a nationwide reckoning over extremism and political radicalization. Gaza Genocide. The Israel-Palestine war began on October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel, killing around 1,200 people and taking hostages. Israel responded with a massive military campaign in Gaza, allegedly aimed at destroying Hamas, but resulting in catastrophic civilian casualties and infrastructure collapse. By October 2025, 69,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, had been killed, leading international observers and the United Nations to accuse Israel of collective punishment and genocide. The siege created famine conditions, displacement, and regional instability, drawing global protests and diplomatic rifts between Western and Global South nations. The war has become one of the century's worst humanitarian and political crises, redefining Middle Eastern tensions.